Hello and welcome back to Autistic After Hours. I'm your host Ashra, and today we're going to be talking about emotional dysregulation. This is something that is commonly experienced by a plethora of people who would fall under the umbrella term neurodivergent, people that are autistic, ADHD, have OCD, have various diagnoses that would impact a person's ability to process emotions, things like borderline personality disorder, other personality disorders. But before we get into the topic, I wanted to say hello to everyone watching on YouTube. As a quick reminder, my podcast is now watchable on YouTube, so if you ever want to watch me while I speak, you can watch me over at Ashra Louisa on YouTube. Also, reminder to follow the podcast at Autistic After Hours on Instagram so that you can be a part of voting for new topics every single Monday and see all of my original content on there. So let's talk about what emotional dysregulation is. It can cover a broad range of things, but it's basically labeled as a difficulty with managing or controlling your emotions, and it can result in what might be deemed inappropriate or atypical emotional reactions to things, whether that be overly intense emotional reactions or more muted emotional reactions. And I want to be clear that if you experience emotional dysregulation, it doesn't mean that you experience your emotions wrong or bad. It just means that the way that your brain works, the way that your sensory processing works, leads to a difference in the ways that you experience emotions. And just because it's different doesn't mean it's bad or wrong, but sometimes emotional dysregulation can be difficult to deal with. And so in that way, it can be important to find effective tools and support to help you navigate the situations and the experiences that you have with emotional dysregulation. But it is really important to note that experiencing your emotions differently does not make you wrong, and it does not make you bad. Some common symptoms of emotional dysregulation might be experiencing very sudden emotional reactions that feel very intense and that are maybe very difficult to recover from, experiencing a lot of shutdowns or meltdowns related to overstimulation or overload, and that could be related to sensory things, but it also could be related to emotional things. And another common symptom is difficulty noticing or being able to label the emotions that you're having while you're having them, or difficulty naming what you're feeling. Now, there are a lot of reasons for why emotional dysregulation might happen. I'm going to talk from my own experience, but one very common reason this happens for me is because of chronic overstimulation. When I am overstimulated, which I often am just because the world is an overstimulating place for me, it can lead to a detachment from my body. It can lead to a lot of dissociation. It can lead to a lot of feelings of numbness or disconnection because it's a way of coping with the overstimulation. And because of this, it can be very hard to recognize my emotions. It can be hard to name what I'm feeling, and it can be hard to cope with my emotions. This often leads to a repression, which then leads to a buildup. And when that buildup is released, it can be very intense. And I often have bouts of depression. I often have bouts of hopelessness. I have a lot of periods where I'm feeling really good and then I kind of crash because I didn't realize I had been suppressing things. Another way this manifests is in the moment. Sometimes I know I'm upset, but I cannot figure out why. I cannot figure out what's upsetting me. I can't figure out the intricacies of what I'm actually feeling. All I know is that something is wrong, but I can't figure out what, or I can't figure out why. And this can lead to needing a lot of process time when it comes to trying to figure out why I'm upset, what's going on in my body. And so when I get into arguments with people, or if I get into fights with people, or I have disagreements, sometimes it takes me a really, really long time to be able to actually express myself because it takes me so long to figure out what I'm feeling and why I'm feeling it. Another big reason why I think I deal with emotional dysregulation is because of masking. So I've spent so much time in my life feeling like I needed to change who I was. I often would tell myself that my feelings were not valid. I didn't trust myself. I spent so much time trying to distance myself from my innate tendencies, feelings, behaviors, and this resulted in a disconnection that ended up being out of my control, and it took me so long, and I'm still in the process of reconnecting with my body and my feelings and my gut instincts and trusting those things because I spent so many years distancing myself from that. Another big thing is that I feel a lot of nervous system dysregulation that I still haven't completely gotten figured out. I think that I may be dealing with dysautonomia, which is to my understanding, a very chronic nervous system dysregulation, and this manifests in emotional ways, in mental ways, in physical symptoms. And so I think a big part of emotional dysregulation for me is that I often feel in a chronic state of being very, very dysregulated inside of my own body. This can lead to a lot of anxiety, a lot of physical symptoms of anxiety, and as a result, I often feel like all of my emotions are under this cloud of a baseline of being super anxious. So when I'm feeling happy, I feel like there's always anxiety in the background, or when I'm feeling upset, there's always anxiety in the background clouding everything. So it's hard for me to purely understand what I'm feeling because I kind of at baseline always feel like my body is dysregulated and I'm physically having symptoms of anxiety even when I'm not really feeling super anxious. It feels like physically my nervous system is always just heightened and really, really super sensitive, and this can make it hard for me to read my emotions. I know that it is a really common experience for autistic people to be told that their emotions or their expression of emotion is too intense or that they're being too much. And this is a really unfortunate thing, and I think it leads to a lot of repression for so many of us. I personally have dealt with the opposite of this in my life in many areas where I'm told that I have a very flat affect, which I think is another common thing for autistic people, where it seems like people sometimes see me as cold or as emotionless. I went through a really long period of my childhood where I almost never cried, and this was very concerning to my mom. I remember her feeling confused and worried about why I didn't seem to express emotion in that way. And as a baby, as a kid, I rarely cried, I rarely got upset, and I think this was really just a manifestation of people-pleasing, even from a very young age. I always felt afraid of being too much, and I always felt afraid of being honest with my emotions, and this is a result of my family dynamic growing up. It's much more than just being autistic. This is a result of the way I grew up, but because of that, I have a hard time expressing my emotions now because I feel afraid of being honest and I feel afraid of upsetting people. I have such a tendency from how I grew up, but also from autistic masking, to people please and to fawn and to forego and let go of my own emotions and try and take responsibility for other people's emotions instead. And at the same time, I don't want to be seen as cold or expressionless, and so it's this dance of trying to not be too much while trying to also be enough, and it's very confusing, and it leads to this wiping out of all of my innate feelings, and it's just another form of masking where I'm trying to do what I'm supposed to do when it's so hard to know what that actually is. And I'm trying instead now to let go of this and to do what's natural to me and to reconnect with my emotions. But it's really hard when you've spent so many years trying not to be too much, but also at the same time trying to be enough and walking that line, which is a very fine line. And when it doesn't come natural to you and when you're not experiencing things in the ways that other people are, it's very confusing and very difficult. It takes so much energy to modify and control yourself in that way. And so I'm trying to not do that anymore, because I want to spend my energy and my time doing other things that are important to me and not wiping all of my innate tendencies away from myself. So I'm trying to reconnect with my actual emotions, with my actual truth, trusting my gut instincts, but it's hard to do that after not doing that for so long. I wanted to just quickly also talk about a few examples of emotional differences that I've noticed in my life with the ways that I respond to things and how it's different from other people or what people typically expect. So a common one is receiving gifts. People often expect like a big emotional reaction from you, but I know for myself, that's not always natural. And so that's an example where sometimes I'm seen as being emotionless when actually I might be super excited. I'm just not expressing it in the ways that people typically expect. And that's super common, I think, for autistic people, where it's not that we aren't experiencing the emotion, it's that we aren't showing it in the ways that people expect. And this leads to them labeling us in a way that doesn't actually match what our true experience is. Another example is autistic joy. Autistic joy can be one of the most beautiful things for autistic people, but so often we are told that our expressions of joy are too much or are childish, we are infantilized. It's really unfortunate because it can be such a pure, happy thing for us, and when we're told that we're weird or that we're being childish by expressing ourselves in that way, it can strip away something that is so important and so joyful and so amazing that we can experience. And it's really sad that that happens. People just unfortunately are very judgmental of things that they don't understand. It's also really important to note in this conversation that I'm coming at it from a place of privilege, where I might worry about people thinking I'm weird because of my expressions of emotion, whether they be intense or not enough, depending on how the person wants to judge me. But for some people, intersectionally marginalized people, Black and brown people, it's a matter of life and death at times. There are people that have been murdered because their expression of emotion didn't match what was expected, because people misinterpreted them, because people judged them incorrectly. People end up in seriously dangerous, sometimes in situations where their life is taken away from them because of this. And so this is a very important conversation. It's something that people really need to be educated on, because autistic people do often express their emotions in different ways. And people need to know that, be aware of that, accept that, understand it, because for some people, it is a matter of life and death in certain situations to be judged incorrectly, to be misinterpreted, misunderstood, because their emotional reaction wasn't what a person was expecting. Now, before we end this episode, I just wanted to touch on a couple of different things that could be helpful if you're dealing with emotional regulation and you're looking for tools or therapy or support to work through it. Some different options are using sensory tools, so like fidget toys, using stim toys to help you physically process things, to help let emotions move through your body. Also, DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, is designed for people with borderline personality disorder, but I do know for a lot of autistic people it can be super helpful. There's a lot of different emotional regulation techniques in DBT. Also, tracking your emotions and using tools to help you label and understand how emotions feel. You can journal your emotions, you can write them down, you can keep track of physical sensations to emotions, so you can try and better understand, okay, when I feel this way, sometimes it's linked to this emotion. When I feel this weird feeling in my stomach, maybe it's linked to anxiety. When I feel this tightening in my chest, maybe it's linked to fear. When I feel this tingly feeling in my hands, maybe it's linked to excitement. So trying to just make those bodily connections to help you better match and be able to identify your feelings and your emotions while they're happening. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. There will be references below in the show notes, as always. Remember that autistic adults exist. We deserve awareness, support, community, and acceptance, and I'm so grateful that you're here. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.